Our study of the book of Hebrews continues today in chapter 11. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a proper child and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. The curtain goes up on the great drama of the man Moses with the simple notice, there arose a new king in Egypt who did not know Joseph. With the long passing of years, the man Joseph of the Hebrews had been forgotten, and what he did for Egypt in the days of the great famine, and how he had saved the people from starvation. The Pharaoh of the new dynasty looked upon the people in the land of Goshen as a source of cheap labor, but he portrayed them as a menace to the Egyptian society. Patriotic speeches were given about the national security when it was really the national economy they were talking about. Pharaoh's first measure was to put the men and women of Israel to hard labor in the stone quarries and brick kilns, building the treasure cities and the monuments of Egypt under the whip of the harsh taskmasters. But that plan backfired. The hard work only made them healthier and physically stronger than they were before. So Pharaoh's second measure was more diabolical, but it didn't work any better. He called in the 2 women who ran the Hebrew Midwives Guild and told them to put to death every male child the moment it is born. A thumb pressing upon a defenseless throat, a hand over the face of an infant, while the mother lay helpless, was a cowardly kind of warfare, without clash of arms or battle cries, but it was just as deadly. Only the king didn't count on the fear of the women. Not fear of him, fear of God. And they didn't do it. And finally, Pharaoh cast all restraint aside and in an insane rage ordered that all the male babies born to the Hebrews were to be thrown into the river. How many homes were broken into by Egyptian police? How many infants were thrown to the crocodiles? How many men and women perished trying to protect their families? Remember this, folks, in the story later on, when the judgment of God comes down heavy on the Egyptians, and all the bleeding hearts want to know how God could let bad things happen. Well, God may not balance his books every day, but in the end, he always does. And our attention is focused upon one family out of the many. 2 children had already been born to that marriage. A 12-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son, when the fateful decree was issued. You can only imagine what must have gone through their minds now as they awaited the birth of the 3rd child. And what joy mingled with sorrow must have been theirs when the baby turned out to be a boy, doomed by the king's decree. Where did these 2 people find the courage to go against the laws of the land? What if they were found out? The risk was great, not only to their baby, to their other children, but to themselves as well. The Bible tells us plainly, by faith, Moses' parents hid him 3 months when he was born because they saw he was a proper child, and they did not fear the king's commandments. Faith gave them the courage. Faith saw obedience to God first, the consequences second. If success came or calamity came, didn't change a thing. Faith enabled them to resist their own impulse for personal security and enabled them to resist the powers of the government and the prevailing attitudes of the day. It is always a lack of faith that has you cowering and cringing before what mighty men might do. It is always the lack of faith that cripples us with anxiety and fears about the future. If you refuse to run the risks, if you play it safe, how could God ever do a great thing for you? You know, if you're going to trim and tailor the challenges of life down to a manageable size, who even needs the helping hand of God for that? They saw he was a proper child. Some think that there was something exceptional about the baby's appearance that signified a unique destiny. Up in the maternity ward, staring through that window at all the red and wrinkled babies in the bassinets, I made the remark that the newborns all look pretty much alike. That was a mistake. All mothers are notoriously prejudiced about the beauty of their own children. And of course, their loving hearts endow the child with a beauty that may not be there. And the beauty is nothing but a reflection of their own love, and there's nothing wrong with that. It seems to me that the phrase proper child means exactly what it says. That the birth of a baby is always fitting and proper regardless of the circumstances. The coming into a dying world of a brand new life. It is always fitting and proper to accept the blessings of the Creator, the fruitfulness of the male and female relationship. Always fitting to believe that if God puts another burden on your arm, He'll give you the strength to bear it. Another mouth at your table, and He will supply what you need to feed it. What's improper about that? And it was that confidence of faith that led the woman to make a little ark out of the same stuff that the riverboats on the Nile were made out of. Throw the boy babies in the river, the king said. So she does. Not cruelly, but carefully sets the little boat among the reeds at the river's edge. What happened next? Was that coincidence? Or was that a daring calculation? Did the mother know to what place the daughter of Pharaoh would come for her sacred ablutions? And though she was the daughter of Pharaoh, she was still a woman. And darn few women are ever going to do with their own hands what the king told them to do. One thing sure, The princess was not fooled when the little girl came running up to help her make her decision. Shall I go and find a nurse of the Hebrews for you to nurse the baby? Who better than the child's own mother to care for the child? Take the child and nurse it, and I will give thee thy wages. Now that must have put some smiles on the faces of the angels of heaven. Moses, she names the little boy, drawn out, for she says, I drew him out of the water. And Moses he will be. For it is by his hand that his people will be drawn out of Egypt. Though they don't know that yet. And it must have been the source of delight in the home. I mean, every week a paycheck comes from the palace to reimburse the mother for doing what she would have done for free. And the king who threatened to kill the child's the guy who's got to pay all the dentist bills, the school tuition, the tennis shoes, the toys for the little boy that one day is going to break the back of Egypt. How marvelous is the providence of God. If only we had the eyes of faith to see it and the humility of heart to believe it. How pathetic and forlorn is that little cradle bobbing on the waves with only a 12-year-old babysitter looking on. One wave too high. The tiniest leak in that basket. The curious glance of one suspicious soldier. And there would be no Moses. No exodus out of Egypt. No march to freedom through the wilderness that the world has never forgotten. How slender is the thread of salvation. How frail the single strand of faith, but how powerful because God is behind it. Take it of the feeble heartbeat of that tiny infant in the cradle, the manger of Bethlehem. When the soldiers of Herod come down looking to kill him. And that scene on Calvary, when the sun goes down upon that empty cross and the gallant enterprise seems crushed and defeated. People, those with faith, see the weakness, but they see God who is behind it and making strength perfect out of weakness. And the eternal purposes of God that can never be frustrated. What a great story. Can you imagine this woman taking care of this little boy? That's what God says to every parent. Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay thee thy wages. These two people were not heroes in the notable sense of the word. They were poor and they were enslaved. If they had any financial security, any social standing, any educational degrees, we do not hear about it. They lived in an evil and dangerous day. And yet they had faith, and that's all you need. To receive a single child as a gift of God. It is faith that makes your home the nursery school of the Holy Spirit. And it is faith that endows a child with something that may bear fruit many years down the pike. Every day, every hour, some woman somewhere is committing a son or daughter to the rivers of this world. Far more dangerous than the River Nile, and as deadly as any crocodile. But she still can have this assurance that the eye of God is ever watchful. His heart is ever faithful. His hand is always open. And his right arm is still strong to save. And so, she tells the little boy a bedtime story. There was a wicked king who once sent soldiers to find a mama's little boy. But she took a wicker laundry basket and put the baby in it and set the little boat and the flags by the river's edge with its precious cargo. And to that very place the princess came, saw the basket, opened the cover, and the baby, looking up at a strange face he had never seen before, began to cry. So the princess did what most any woman would do, picked them up, hugged them, cooed his tears away, and adopted him as her own prince to grow up in the royalty of the Egyptian palace. And you can see the little boy, can't you? Eyes wide in wonderment. Mama, is that a make-believe story? No, my son. That is not a make-believe story. That is your story, Moses. And the story of God's protection in your life. Are there not in your lives, my brothers and sisters, stories stranger than fiction? Times when the hand of God was plainly visible, when prayers were answered beyond all dreaming or desiring. Most of the time, I think, there are no outstanding miracles, as there are none in this story. Just the hand of God working when to us it does not seem to be working at all. When, like the infant Moses, we are completely unaware of what God is doing for us. Now, you may not have the time or the talent for it, but a good many of you could write a fairly interesting book entitled The Miracle of My Days and dedicate it to the goodness of God. But the greatest story of God's goodness is not found in the diary of your life or mine, but in the old book of promise, which says, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends, says Christ. And you are my friends. Amen.